Now, despite all the noise around the net neutrality and telcos being made out to be the big bad boys, the Telecom Department's report finds some favour with the arguments made by the telecom operators. ET Now's Gaurie Dwivedi gets us some exclusive details on a report that may shape the way you and I use internet in India. Gaurie, if you can tell us what's the headline from the report and how does it impact telcos?
Kamya, the report that has been submitted to the minister pretty much categorically says that over-the-top content service providers need to have some sort of regulation. There has to be a regulatory oversight for OTT service providers, and that's a huge breakthrough as far as telecom companies are concerned. Let me just read out what it really says is that overlapping services of OTT content service providers, basically services like WhatsApp calling or all basic telephony that was being done on OTT service content providers network. All those services need to have some sort of regulatory intervention. This is exactly what telecom companies have been maintaining all along, that their revenues are going to get eroded, their bottom lines will get impacted if there is no regulatory intervention for such services that are being offered by OTT services providers. So in that sense, it's a huge breakthrough as far as telecom companies are concerned. The report categorically says that they in fact favor legitimate traffic management by telecom operators. Again, an argument that has been maintained by telecom companies that have maintained that if there is no traffic management on their networks have the potential of crashing, which is where net neutrality is important, but there has to be some legitimate concerns of telecom companies that need to be addressed. So in a nutshell, this is a huge positive as far as telecom companies are concerned. A committee set up internally by the Telecom Department, headed by member technology in DOT, categorically says that some sort of regulatory intervention is required for OTT service providers.
So I'm sure OTT operators will not take it, lying down. They will come with a long list of complaints, right?
Well, because if you look at it, there are, of course, concerns raised by OTT operators. First and foremost, the biggest argument all along has been that they cannot operate at the scale at which telecom companies operate, and therefore the rules cannot be the same for both of them. In fact, even the report admits that the stakeholders have divergent views, they have different set of concerns, and both of them need to be addressed by public policy. So in fact, the report categorically says that public policy must not hinder innovation at any cost. It also, of course, says that public policy must not hinder investment, but innovation is a huge theme of the report, and it categorically says public policy must make all attempts to ensure that innovation is not hindered. So in that sense, OTT providers or over-the-top content providers, their arguments are also, they find a favor with the report. So you can expect maybe at a future point of time when decisions are taken by the government that these concerns will be addressed as well. But one thing is for sure, that some regulation will happen, but it will not be identical as it is for telecom companies. Telecom companies, of course, have a huge set of fees that they need to pay. It's very unlikely that a similar situation will arise for OTT service providers. They will have a different set of regulation. What they will be, of course, is something that we'll get to know over a period of time.
Okay, hold on, Gaurie. We also have Rajan Mathews, who's a DG at COAI, who's going to be joining us. And but before we do that, Gaurie, one more question we want to ask you. What's going to be the likely policy action from here on as far as the net neutrality is concerned?
See, net neutrality is a huge issue, not just in India, but globally. In fact, the minister has said that maybe there is time to revisit the laws. You can expect maybe a law being enacted at some point of time, in which case, of course, it needs to go to the parliament. This report, which at this stage is not public, could be made public. Maybe stakeholders' comments could be invited to this. Of course, TRAI's recommendations will be kept in mind when a final decision is taken. But there is a sense within the establishment that there is a need to probably revisit the laws that govern telecom services in India. And in fact, on that note, there is a very important point that has been made by the report, which categorically says that if at any point of time a new law is made for governing telecom services in India, net neutrality provisions need to be kept in mind. And till the time a new law is not in place, then enforceable provisions within the license conditions need to be brought in for telecom companies to adhere to.
Rajan Mathews, let's start with zing in your voice. This is what telecom operators always wanted.
Well, first of all, let me say that we always have been of the position that we support net neutrality. We are also one of the biggest promoters of the so-called OTT players. The point that we have said is that the broadband penetration in India is so low. Vis-a-vis July 1st, Honorable Prime Minister is going to roll out broadband programs. We need to ensure that the same rules that apply for the same services apply, because that is critical for the Prime Minister's broadband program. So I believe the DOT recommendations, and I don't have any independent verification of this, I'm relying on Gaurie's description of it, I think recognizes that in order to push forward that broadband program, we must have these provisions in place.
Mr. Mathews, this is Gaurie. In fact, the report categorically says that all tariff plans or all plans really are in the domain of the TRAI, and in fact, the regulator should also check for any unfair trade practices being followed by telecom companies. How much of a big boost is this for the industry, which has all along been maintaining that TRAI should be the only body looking at all plans, for instance, even the zero-rated plan of Airtel?
I think that is an appropriate provision, considering that the TRAI Act does give the tariff regulatory responsibility to TRAI. So the recognition of that is a good thing. And I believe the TRAI will now obviously take that under consideration. It is obviously waiting to give out its recommendations. And so we'll wait to see. And I think that that's a good provision, because there are blue sky provisions. All stakeholders are invited through that blue sky process of TRAI to submit their issues and concerns. And it's after evaluation of all of the inputs from the stakeholders that usually the TRAI makes its recommendation. So I think that is a fair process to have in place.
Mr. Mathews, the report says that overlapping services of OTT service providers need some sort of a regulatory intervention, but it also goes on to say it cannot be treated identically to telecom companies. So what kind of a regulatory mechanism do you envisage for OTT service providers?
Gaurie, we'll just fix that line. We can't really hear you clearly. Mr. Mathew, would like to get in your perspective as to, would you expect, what kind of a reaction would you see from the consumers? Because last time when this was announced, we saw a huge uproar on all the social networking websites. Do you expect a similar momentum right now as well with this news coming in?
I think we have to understand from where these responses are coming. We had over 4 million responses ourselves when we conducted a survey as well in terms of what is it that the non-users presently would require in terms of access to the internet. Of course, the folks who are doing this on the other side of net neutrality had their numbers. They had, I believe, about 1 lakh or so of responses. We had about 4 million, or about close to that in terms of our responses. So I think the point to be kept in mind is that, listen, once there is a level playing field, I think consumers will make the appropriate choices in terms of what applications they want to use. And I think that has been our primary push, saying that, listen, same services should be under the umbrella of the same rules. And I believe that is what the regulations, if I believe it to be the case, really is emphasizing.
Mr. Mathews, what kind of a regulatory mechanism do you really envisage as far as OTT service providers are concerned? It's highly unlikely that they will be, of course, subjected to the same sort of fees that telecom companies pay. So what is the kind of regulatory mechanism you think OTT companies could be asked to adhere to?
So one of the points that we have made earlier on is that we are not interested in overly having things regulated. We ourselves have always pushed for light touch regulation. So I think what we would look for is that in those specific cases of the overlap, the language you use, where they are providing voice, messaging, and messaging services over video, that in those instances only, and all the other content is not what we are focusing on, just those overlapping services, that the types of requirements that we have, for example, legal enforcement requirements would be an area that the government would need to look at. the types of fees that are paid for these types of services, because obviously revenue to the government is also a matter of consideration that would have to be looked at. The collection of taxes such as service taxes would also be something that would have to be sort of applied in that situation. Those are the areas that I'm sure the TRAI will look at in terms of application of same rules, same service.
But Gaurie, Rajan, thank you both for joining us, and that is a big story, and that certainly will change the dynamics of the definition of net neutrality, at least from an India context.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.